snap. The kick is in the air, and the kick this time is no, sir-ree. No, sir-ree. Final score, Tennessee 20, Florida 17. Pandemonium reigns.
You're listening to the RTI Podcast, powered by RockyTopInsider.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome in to another episode of the RTI Podcast. I am Nathaniel Rutherford, the managing editor of RockyTopInsider.com, joined by Ben McKee, our staff writer at RTI, and he's also, of course, the producer and co-host of the morning radio show, The Swain Event. You can listen to that from 7 to 10 a.m. every single morning in Knoxville on the Swain Event app and on Swain Event TV on Periscope and Facebook Live. We appreciate all of you tuning in to another episode of the RTI Podcast. If this is your first time, thank you very much. You can find us on Apple Podcasts. If you have an Android device, we're on there as well. You can also go to the website, RockyTopInsider.com, click on the podcast tab, listen to it straight from there, or download it from there. Or while you're there, you can also watch it on our YouTube channel, or you can go to YouTube and type in Rocky Top Insider, subscribe to us there, and watch it on that way. It's I say watch it. It'll kind of be a screen that'll have some pictures and stuff on there, but that's a way that a lot of people do listen to the show and do interact with us and leave comments and stuff on the podcast as well. So that's a way that a lot of people have ended up listening to the podcast, and we really appreciate all of you who do that. Ben, we got a very busy, very full episode to get to here. This one might run a little long, a little longer than most of them. They all kind of end up being a little bit longer than I anticipate them being, but this one we've got a lot to cover because we're not just talking about football, but we're talking about basketball because it is finally basketball time in Tennessee. It's not being welcomed in with as much fervor now as it was maybe a month ago because the football team has kind of turned things around a little bit, thankfully. But I do think a lot of people are very, very excited still about basketball. I know you and I are, and actually I know the whole RTI team is, because I think really, honestly, all the main contributors at RTI, I think we all might be bigger basketball fans than football fans. So we might be a little bit more excited about the basketball season than maybe the majority of the UT fan base. But we're very excited about. We have a lot to talk about there. We'll get to that in a minute. Talk about the Uros Plavsic stuff. We'll talk about kind of the season in general. But then first, some football notes here from the weekend. Tennessee gets a 30-7 win over UAB. I did a post-game show about the game, not long after it was over. But I do want to kind of get your thoughts on it. I look at this game as Tennessee went in. They took care of business. They kept it pretty vanilla, pretty bland on offense on purpose. They weren't doing the same type of play calling they were doing against South Carolina, for example, or even what they did maybe against Georgia several weeks ago, or even Alabama several weeks ago. They didn't have as much explosive play calling against Bama, obviously, but still, to me, it felt more like the Mississippi State game where Tennessee relied very much more on their defense, tried to do a little more run heavy on offense, and really just asked the quarterbacks when they were in there, whether it was Garantano or Strout, to kind of just be game managers. They didn't really toss it down the field a ton. And when they didn't really have a whole lot of success, so they didn't really try it a whole lot. So I look at it as people were kind of frustrated, I think, on Saturday. I think some fans were expecting Tennessee maybe to go lights out in the game because of what they did against South Carolina. I never did because I thought, one, UAB's defense was good. They weren't as good as they were showing on paper because they played a very, very bad schedule. But I did think they were still good. You don't get to 6-1 and not be good, even though you're playing pretty trash teams. I still thought UAB's defense was going to give Tennessee some issues, and it looked like they did, especially Tennessee's offensive line. I do have some issues with Tennessee's red zone offense, still not being able to convert into touchdowns, having to settle for field goals, or turning the ball over, which they did again. Overall, though, I don't know that we should take away a ton from this game, other than I think to me it showed a big sign of progress from week one to now, where Tennessee was able to go against an inferior opponent and a team that I think might be a better team than Georgia State. Although Georgia State's put together a pretty good season, they're 6-2 now, with that win over Tennessee being one that's helped propel them to bowl eligibility. But to me it showed a clear sign that Tennessee has taken several steps forward from where they were week one, because they led from start to finish, and that game was never in doubt against UAB.
Yeah, for sure. I thought that the score wasn't indicative of how thoroughly Tennessee dominated UAB, and really more so on the defensive end. I thought that game was more representative of a 40 to 45 point win rather than a 23-point win, and part of that is offensive line issues. Part of that is being able to run the football type issues. Part of that was red zone issues, and really I know the red zone is the glaring weakness right now for the offense, but I thought that against UAB they more so struggled between the 50 and the 30 rather than 25 and in, because of the 4 red zone appearances in the first half. They scored on 3 of them, and granted, one of them was only a field goal, and obviously you want to come away with a touchdown rather than a field goal, but a field goal is better than nothing. So they're 75%, and then the one time that they did not punch it in was when Jarrett Garantano had his poor interception in the end zone there at the end of the first half. So I thought the defense played great. Defensive line really pushed UAB around. Aubrey Solomon, Daryl Middleton, those guys I thought played really well. Aubrey Solomon picking up his first career sack, and then you look at the linebacker Henry To'oTo'o and Daniel Batuli continue to play really good football, as did Darrell Taylor, who absolutely whipped UAB's tackles all game long. And then you look in the secondary, and Bryce Thompson had 3 interceptions, and sure, they were thrown right to him, but credit to him for being in the right spot. And as a result of his play, he ends up as the SEC Defensive Player of the Week. Nigel Warrior led the team in tackles. I thought it was a pretty good game for the secondary as well. Definitely Bryce Thompson, as I mentioned. Special teams, it just continues to be one of the best special teams units in the country. Paxton Brooks punted the ball fairly well, 44 yards a punt, 1 inside the 20. Well, actually, I believe it was 2 inside the 20 and a long of 54, if I'm not mistaken. And then Brent Smaglia, I mean, he's one of the best kickers in the country, arguably the best kicker in the country. 36-yard field goal, 48-yard field goal, and then a career high, or a career long, I should say, of 53 yards, which was the longest field goal Tennessee has made since 1995. So defense and special teams was really good. And then offensively, I just thought it was up and down. I don't necessarily think the quarterback play was as bad as Twitter wants to make it out to be. That doesn't mean that Jarrett Garantano played good, but he didn't play bad by any stretch of the imagination. Really only had 2 plays that, in my opinion, he would like to have back. Obviously, the interception right there before halftime, throwing off his back foot. And in his defense, there was pressure in his face. But if anything, you're a 4th-year quarterback, just kind of get rid of the football in the sense of throw it away. That way you kick a field goal. That was on 3rd down, I believe. So instead of throwing a pick in the end zone, throw that ball away, or heck, even take a sack right there in the middle of the field because you're still in field goal range. Don't turn the football over. You take points off the board. So it was that play. Then there was a play. Everybody thought that JG underthrew Juwan Jennings, but I thought the bigger mistake on that particular play was that he had Callaway coming open over the middle of the field. Callaway had beaten his man one-on-one and would have picked up the first down. Instead, he throws it to Juwan Jennings. And according to Jason Swain, he kind of illustrated what JG was supposed to do on that play. And according to Jason Swain, he did it correctly. So really the problem with that play was him missing Callaway over the middle of the field. And he had the drop snap, and maybe I'm just being too soft on him on this particular play, but I just kind of credit that to, him having a broken wrist. He has multiple screws in his left wrist right now, and I thought that was a product of that. But overall, JG did not play as bad as Twitter is making it out to be, but he also had a lot of things that he could have done better. So overall, a good performance and a good win over a good UAB football team.
Yeah, it's one that, like I said, I think it showed that Tennessee had taken several steps, and I agree with you. I think JG's play wasn't as bad as maybe some on social media would like to try to say, but I do think that it wasn't great. In Tennessee, on offense wasn't great overall. The offensive line, it kind of surprised me how poorly they played. Not that they played nearly as badly as they had last year or even at the beginning of this season, And that UAB defense does deserve a lot of credit. This isn't just, bashing Tennessee. That UAB defense is good, and that front seven of theirs is very good too. It just wasn't Tennessee's, most efficient and the best rhythm they've ever had on offense, but they still were able to put up 30 points on offense because all that came on offense. Obviously they got short fields multiple times because of the interceptions and the forced fumble, but they still put up 30 points on a defense that hadn't allowed more than 20 points all season. And like I said, I know they played some pretty bad teams, and a lot of the offenses they'd faced were also very bad. But Tennessee coming into this game actually offensively nationally was ranked not very much higher than the rest of the teams that UAB had played all season. I think most of the teams that they had played had been like in the bottom 120, but the best offensive team they had played this year was Western Kentucky, who was I think like 105th in points per game and 107th in yards per game, and they won 20-13 in that game. Tennessee coming into Saturday was, I think they're 97th in yards or points, and then 105th in yards or points. They're 105th and 97th in one of those two categories. So they weren't like, much different than where the other teams that UAB had played. But also take into account that Tennessee's played, some really good defenses, and especially with Florida and Georgia and Alabama. So those numbers are obviously going to be a little different when you're playing the types of teams Tennessee's playing rather than the types of teams that UAB and Western Kentucky are playing. But enough about the game. That's I don't want to harp on the game too much. I think Tennessee overall that was a good game, especially on defense. That was a game where you shut them out for 57 minutes, almost headed into the Kentucky game with a shutout streak intact, if not for a garbage time touchdown. Tennessee is, heading into Kentucky with 6 straight quarters without a touchdown. As it is, they've only given up 1 touchdown in the last 6 quarters, and that's pretty impressive. But Ben, moving forward, kind of looking at, we both talked a little bit about Garantano. I guess we both kind of touched on Strout just a little bit. He didn't play a ton. Saturday, it was clear that he wasn't playing at the same level he was against South Carolina, and the coaches, didn't trust him a whole lot in that game, and he'd made some mistakes. And he threw in the double cover. He threw across his body on that first drive. He threw in a double coverage when he came in the second half at one point. He was making more mistakes in this game than I think he did against South Carolina. And you saw the coaches take him out and say, all right, we're not trusting you with the offense right now. We're going to play JG, even though he's got screws in his wrist and is not playing at the high level right now. He still was a better option, I think, than Strout for that game. Moving forward, though, Pruitt said on Monday, you were there at the press conference, Ben. He said on Monday that they're gonna. He essentially did the whole coach speak thing where they're not going to give away any of their game plan to their opponent. He said we could play 1, we could play 2, we could play 3, all 3 guys at quarterback this weekend against Kentucky. But he did say Brian Maurer was cleared to play last weekend. They just didn't play him. They said they'll kind of see where he is this week, but you assume that he will be even healthier this week than he was last week. I talked a little bit about this in the post-game show on Saturday night, but I believe if Maurer's healthy, this is his team. This is his job. I don't think we've seen anything from Stroud or Garantano in his absence. Maybe Garantano's play against South Carolina, but now that he has that wrist problem and kind of played a little bit back to kind of more what we've seen from him this season, I don't think either Stroud or Garantano have done enough to unseat Maurer. If Garantano had stayed healthy against South Carolina and then came out and was healthy against UAB, I almost wonder about that. But obviously, that's just a bunch of what ifs and buts and everything like that. It didn't happen. So I think this is still Maurer's job once he comes back, and as long as he's healthy. And I think unless he gets knocked out of the game again or sustains another concussion or anything like that, I feel very, very confident in saying that Maurer's the guy moving forward, and I don't see a reason to not start him unless he is still suffering ill effects from his concussion this weekend against Kentucky.
Yeah, I think it's Brian Maurer's job when he is ready to go, but I do think that the coaching staff is going to be very cautious with him moving forward. All indications are that he's one more concussion away from having to sit the rest of the year and then potentially next year being in jeopardy. So I still don't believe that there's a humongous drop-off from Brian Maurer to Jared Garantano. There is a drop-off for sure. That's why Maurer is the better man for the job. But I don't think it's as big as people want to believe it is. JG can still go out there and lead you to wins over Kentucky, Missouri, and Vanderbilt, just like he did against Mississippi State, South Carolina, and UAB. he can still do that, assuming that he plays like he did in those games and doesn't turn the football over. So I do think it's Brian Maurer's job when he comes back, but will he be back to 100% this season? And if that's not the case, then I don't think Tennessee is going to risk trotting him out there, because then you are seriously jeopardizing his future on and off the football field. So that's why I think that you are seeing them so cautious with that situation moving forward. JT Shrout didn't do anything to unseat him. Mm-hmm. I think you can make the case. I know people don't want to listen to it, but I think you can make the case that JG did based off the way he played against South Carolina. And, you know, it's just 2 games after Maurer threw 2 red zone interceptions against Mississippi State. And I realized that JG had one of his own, but the reality of the situation is that what you make up for in talent with Brian Maurer, and what you make up for in energy from the team, and what you make up for in terms of not missing open receivers and getting the football out on time, what you make up from the transition from JG to Maurer in those departments, well, there's a drop-off in likelihood of turning the football over from Maurer to JG. I trust JG to not turn the football over more than I trust Brian Maurer, whereas I trust Brian Maurer to make more plays than JG, if that makes sense. So you kind of pair the likelihood that Maurer is more likely to turn the football over, pair that with the injury situation, and I don't think it's as easy of a decision as some want to believe, because, again, I think, quite frankly, I think Tennessee could trot either of the 3 quarterbacks out there and win the rest of the games on the schedule. That doesn't mean that it would happen, but I still like the way that Tennessee's defense is playing. And lately, Tennessee's quarterbacks have done a fairly good job of taking care of the football. And Tennessee has done a good job of running the football outside of the UAB game. And I truly believe that the reason they weren't able to run the football so successfully in the UAB game was because of the injury situation. So assuming that the running game gets back going against Kentucky and remains successful throughout the end of the year, I think Tennessee could win with either of the 3 quarterbacks, as long as they aren't turning the football over, and as long as the running game is going, and as long as the defense continues to play the way that it has. But ultimately, I do agree with you, Nathaniel. It's Brian Maurer's job when he's ready. I just kind of went on that tangent because if he's not 100% healthy, then I don't think we will see a change at quarterback, just because there's no need in risking his health both on the football field and off the football field. Concussions are nothing to play with. And he's already had 2 within 7 days this year. A third one would definitely jeopardize the rest of this season for him, but it could also potentially jeopardize next season for him as well. Because, again, concussions are nothing to play with, as we all know. So it'll be something interesting to watch this week and moving forward, because I thought that Jeremy Pruitt's comment that Brian Maurer was full go all of last week was very telling of the situation. Sure, Brian Maurer didn't get the reps in practice that JG or that Shrout did, but the fact that he was full go and didn't get those reps, that tells me that, okay, maybe they are a little bit weary of his concussion situation.
And I think with him, and I think you and I both have said this, I think I've said it on a couple of the last post-game shows, I think with that situation specifically, it's a lot better to be safe than sorry with brain injuries. It's better to be safe than sorry, I think, with a lot of injuries in general, because we've just seen so many players over the last, look at Tennessee and specifically here the last 3 or 4 years, all the guys who've had to medically retire. I think it's better to be safe than sorry with a lot of injuries, but especially with the brain trauma that you get from concussions. I think it's better to be safe than sorry with him. Getting 2 weeks off is good for him. I think he should be okay to play against Kentucky. If not, then it becomes a little more questionable if Tennessee wins that game. But then if he doesn't play that game, he gets that week off, and then gets the bye week off, and then you would imagine, surely with 4 weeks, kind of almost a month off, he should be good to go. It would be a month off by the time he actually got to the Missouri game. So you think by then he should be good to go. But I think he'll be able to play and start for Tennessee this weekend against Kentucky. You're mentioning there, before we kind of transition into some basketball talk, you're talking about Tennessee's ability to run the ball. Statistically, Missouri has the best run defense of the teams Tennessee will be facing left, and statistically they're actually kind of right on par with Tennessee on the season. They're 7th in the SEC. Tennessee's 8th in terms of yards allowed. They're giving up 136.8 yards per game, or 136.9, excuse me. Tennessee's giving up 137.7, so they're almost exactly even there. Did I do that right? Yeah, that's right. Missouri's giving up 3.7 yards per carry. Tennessee, 3.7 yards per carry. The Vols, the difference is Tennessee's giving up 14 rushing touchdowns. Missouri's giving up 11. But in SEC play, take out the South Carolina game where the Gamecocks only ran 24 times for 16 yards and a touchdown, which that's just abysmal. Take out that game, they've been, the last 3 games, I didn't actually really know this until just now looking up, they've been, pretty soundly torched on the rushing attack. Ole Miss, though they beat Ole Miss 38-27, Ole Miss totaled 204 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns on 45 carries, so about 4.5 yards per carry. Vanderbilt, who just doesn't have a good team, they lost to Vandy, obviously. They carried the ball 42 times for 150 yards and a touchdown, about 3.6 yards per carry. And then Kentucky, in that last game, which was obviously a monsoon, and you had Lynn Bowden Jr. at quarterback for the Wildcats, they ran the ball 48 times for almost 300 yards, 297 yards, 4 touchdowns, and they averaged 6.2 yards per carry. So Missouri's rushing defense has not been very good, actually in SEC play the last 3 weeks. But then you look at what Kentucky and Vanderbilt do as run defenses, and they're 2 of the worst in the SEC. The only run defense worse than those 2 teams in the SEC this season in terms of yards allowed per game, and actually in yards per carry as well, is Arkansas. Arkansas is the worst in the SEC. Vanderbilt's 13th. Kentucky is 12th. Both those teams are pretty bad. Kentucky's been giving up 174.9 yards per game. Vanderbilt's been giving up 202.5 yards per game on the ground. These 2 teams, all the teams left on Tennessee's schedule, they should be able to run against them. And I'm not predicting Tennessee will run for 200 yards apiece, against all these teams. But it's their team's been, as you're mentioning, if Tennessee's going to try to keep doing what they've been doing and kind of managing the game a little bit and kind of relying a little bit more on the defense and the rushing attack, these are teams they should be able to do that against, because these teams have been struggling against the run, and you're going to have a Kentucky team that, yes, they're coming off a bye week. And it's kind of touching on that game first before we go to basketball, Ben, but we'll talk more about that later on this week, obviously, closer to game time. But this Kentucky team is very interesting to me. I'm going to talk hopefully later on this week with Derek Terry of 247 Sports, who covers Kentucky for 247. I've had him on the podcast, I think during football and basketball season both last year, to talk about the Wildcats. But I want to talk with him, get kind of update on Kentucky's quarterback situation with Sawyer Smith and, of course, Lynn Bowden. But, Ben, I almost wonder if it benefits Tennessee with the way Sawyer Smith has played this season. I almost wonder if it's better for Tennessee if he actually starts rather than Lynn Bowden, because he's just been so turnover prone. With Bowden in there, that they're going to throw the ball occasionally, but he hasn't actually thrown an interception this year, and he's been, they don't ask him to do a whole lot as a passer, but he's just so dangerous with the ball in his hands that obviously I know if Sawyer Smith does play, they're still going to have a Wildcat formation with Bowden or Bowden, excuse me, and they're going to get him the ball as much as they can. But with him having the ball in his hands every single play as a quarterback, I almost think it might be better for Tennessee if Sawyer Smith is ready to go and is able to play at quarterback, and they go ahead and go with him over Bowden, because I just think Bowden's a little more dangerous of an athlete and of a player than what Sawyer Smith is. And Smith has just not been very impressive, except for one game against Florida this year, and even then he was very turnover prone in that game. Except for kind of that, he's just been very, very lackluster this season for Kentucky.
So I guarantee you right now, if Sawyer Smith plays, I guarantee you Tennessee wins the football game. 100% chance. If I'm Tennessee and Jeremy Pruitt, I'm praying and hoping that Mark Stoops makes a stupid decision, because he's been sulking in all of this Florida State attention and makes a boneheaded decision to start Sawyer Smith. I don't even think there's a decision to be made, to be quite honest with you. Does Sawyer Smith maybe provide more for you in the passing game? Absolutely. He's a true quarterback, but Lynn Bowden, whatever his last name is, he might be the most electric player in the SEC in terms of what he can do with the football in his hands. And I know that Juwan Jennings means a ton to this Tennessee football team. Juwan Jennings does not mean what Lynn Bowden does to that Kentucky football team.
Right.
You take Lynn Bowden off of that Kentucky football team, and Kentucky maybe has a win on the season. I mean, if it's not for him, Kentucky is not 4-4 and 2-4 on the season right now. They absolutely are not. He has been so dynamic in the running game, and it's amazing how productive he has been when the opposing defense knows what's coming each and every play. I can assure you that they do not beat Missouri, they do not beat Arkansas, and they probably, well, I guess technically he wasn't the quarterback early in the season against Toledo and Eastern Michigan, but they don't keep it close with South Carolina there for a while. They don't keep it close with Georgia there for a while without Lynn Bowden Jr. And like I said, they definitely don't beat Arkansas or Missouri without his contribution. So I like the matchup because Pruitt tends to really game plan well for strong rushing teams.
Yeah.
But there is still a worry just because Lynn Bowden has just been so dynamic with the football in his hands this season. So I get what you're picking up, and I agree with you with the whole Sawyer Smith thing. I just think it would be boneheaded if at this point Kentucky decided to start him at quarterback, just for the simple fact that, like you mentioned, he turns the football over a lot, and he's not near as dynamic with the football as Lynn Bowden is. So it'll be a fun football game. Cash Daniel, the heart and soul of the Kentucky defense, he's had to sit out their last game out. They're coming off a bye week, but in Kentucky's 29-7 win over Missouri 2 weeks ago, Cash Daniel did not play in that one due to injury, so it will be interesting to see if he plays in this one. This is a Kentucky team that if Tennessee shows up and plays like they did in September, Tennessee will absolutely lose. But I think if both teams play their best games, if Kentucky plays its A game, if Tennessee plays its A game, Tennessee's going to win this football game.
Yeah, I think you're right on that one. To me, Sawyer Smith, I don't have his stats right in front of me. I actually should look them up right now, but he's been really bad for Kentucky this season, and I think that it's been surprising. They've been a team, I think, probably more than any other team in the SEC, and there's been several teams this year who've just been really hurt by injuries, but I think them probably more than any other team in the SEC has just been really, really hurt by injuries at quarterback, because, I mean, he's been hurt. Obviously, you used Terry Wilson after the second game of the season this year, and that has really set back what Missouri wants to do, or what they wanted to do coming into the season, and really changed the kind of trajectory of the season as a whole, because they've not been able to do a lot of what they wanted to do on offense because of his, missing his running ability. And he's not, he wasn't the greatest passer, but he took care of the ball more, obviously, what Sawyer Smith has done. In 6 games this season, I have his stats in front of me. In 6 games, he's completed 44% of his passes. He's attempted 159 passes for 906 yards, 4 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Not good whatsoever. There's multiple games this year where he against Eastern Michigan, he came in that game, he was 5 of 9. That was actually probably his best game. That was the game he came in after Terry Wilson got hurt. It was 5 of 9 for 76 yards and 2 touchdowns. Played okay against Florida. 65% completion percentage for 267, 2 touchdowns but 3 picks. Didn't throw a touchdown against Mississippi State, had an interception. Didn't throw a touchdown against South Carolina, had an interception. Both those games were sub 40% completion percentage in that game. He only threw 1 pass against Missouri, and then Bowden handled the rest of that one. So I agree with you, Ben. I think if Smith starts, I really, really, really feel good about Tennessee's chances of winning that game. If Bowden starts, I still think Tennessee wins, but I feel a little less optimistic about it because he's just such a dynamic playmaker, and if he has the ball in his hands all the time, and we've seen this year, he's been able to. He's led them to 2 wins, obviously against kind of the Missouri win was surprising, but he led them to win over Arkansas, which is a bad team. They did get shut out by Georgia, 21-0, and then they beat Missouri 29-7. So we'll talk a little bit more about that game and about Kentucky specifically later this week in the second podcast this week. Ben, let's get to some basketball talk because there's a lot to cover there. Tennessee's basketball season, the men's team and women's team both, Lady Vols and the men, both begin their season. I don't know when you're listening to this, so it could be today if you're listening to this on Tuesday. But November 5th at 7 o'clock at night, Tennessee will tip off against UNC Asheville on the men's side, and Lady Vols will be traveling to Johnson City to take on ETSU for the season opener for them. But Ben, it's finally basketball time in Tennessee. But before we get to some kind of talk about the season in general and kind of our expectations, this will lead into that because this kind of affects what we think Tennessee's expectations should be this year. But Tennessee announced on Saturday around noon-ish, I think maybe closer to 1, but it was around noon, 1, somewhere around there, before Tennessee kicked off against UAB in football, that they'd heard back from the NCAA, that initially the NCAA denied Uros Plavsic's eligibility waiver. Tennessee had appealed it, and the NCAA denied that as well. There's a lot of reaction to that from, obviously media, from fans. Plavsic himself sent out a statement via Twitter. Almost the entire Tennessee basketball roster, from what I saw, tweeted out something along the lines of, hashtag free Uros. It was most of those guys. Several former Vols actually did too. I think you had a couple. I think maybe Jordan McRae did it, or you had a couple of different guys in the NBA who did the same thing, quoted Uros's tweet or quoted the Tennessee tweet, or just apropos of nothing, just tweeted out free Uros, and it was of all the stuff. I disagree with the NCAA denying of them their decision, but if nothing else, it was kind of cool to see all of the coming together of the fans of the current and former players of this decision. But Ben, we heard from Barnes on Monday. He spoke at the Knoxville Quarterback Club, and then you were there for his media availability on Monday afternoon. And I thought this was going to be the case because the wording of Tennessee Athletics Director Philip Fulmer over the weekend in his statement made it sound like they were not going to give up and they were going to try to find, maybe another way to have another appeal or to do something to try to keep plugging away at this. Barnes said on Monday that there's another appeals process they can go and do, and they're going to do it. So this will be the second appeal process that Tennessee is going to try to do. They, both Barnes and Fulmer used pretty strong language. I think Fulmer said stunned. I think Barnes said shocked. He may have actually ended up saying surprised or stunned as well in some of his comments on Monday. It was very evident from the whole offseason that Barnes was pretty optimistic that this was going to happen, that the NCAA was going to rule in favor of Tennessee and of Uros, and everyone seemed pretty surprised that they didn't. I am surprised as well. At the same time, I'm not, because this is the NCAA and they don't surprise me a lot of times with these types of things. But with me, Ben, I want to get your thoughts just in general about it, but also how does this decision affect your expectations for the season? Because even if this second appeal does get passed, it doesn't feel like it's going to be anytime soon. I would imagine it'd still be several more weeks. At that point, Tennessee will probably have already played Washington up in Toronto, so you already will have had one of your tough non-conference games out of the way. It could not even get heard until maybe Tennessee's already played Memphis on the basketball court. Even then, there's no guarantee that this second appeals process is going to get approved, and there's still a pretty good chance that, and probably better than 50% chance, if I had to say, that Plavsic's just not going to play this year. So how does this affect your expectations for Tennessee's men's basketball season?
Well, first off, I feel bad for Uros Plavsic because this is just completely unfair. Essentially, he was following an assistant coach around from stop to stop. Originally, he played his high school basketball there in Chattanooga at Hamilton Heights, and then he was going to go to Cleveland State, is what I was told, until this coach that Plavsic was allowing him to kind of be his mentor, be somebody in his life that really helped him with this whole college decision-making process. He was the assistant coach at Cleveland State. He gets the job at Arizona State, which is why Uros Plavsic went to Arizona State. The sole reason, it was really, quite frankly, a package deal. Bobby Hurley at Arizona State only hired this assistant coach solely to bring in Uros Plavsic. He goes there, and then that assistant coach that Plavsic had been listening to gets fired because, quite frankly, he's just not a good dude and things of that nature. And so Plavsic transfers back home to Tennessee, and he redshirted last year. So if he does end up ultimately having to sit out, which it looks like it is going to be the case, sure, Tennessee is appealing for the second time. But how often do we hear about people, the verdict being changed after something's been appealed once, yet alone twice? So I highly doubt that Tennessee will have Uros Plavsic eligible this year. But it's just really sad because, as I was saying, because he redshirted last year, he'll lose a year of eligibility. When most people transfer, like Jalen Hurd, when Jalen Hurd transferred to Baylor, he preserved a year of eligibility because he never redshirted at Tennessee. So when he redshirted, he still had a year of eligibility left. Mm-hmm. Well, Plavsic has already used his year of eligibility, which means he's going to lose a year off of how long he's permitted to play college basketball. So instead of 4 years, he'll only be allowed to play for 3. And that's really sad when you consider why he went to Arizona State, how he was misguided by multiple people, and then once that assistant coach left Arizona State because he was a terrible coach, he transfers back home, and he's not allowed. Plavsic was a victim of somebody trying to take advantage of him, somebody trying to use Plavsic as their ticket to success. Plavsic had no idea. He was just doing what he was told. He did nothing wrong. It's just really unfortunate, and it's really sad that the NCAA can't see that. So I feel bad for Uros, and hopefully the NCAA will reverse its decision. Apparently Arizona State has not been all that compliant with the situation, which is even more ridiculous. And look, I realize that this is in the wake of Philip Fulmer reportedly not necessarily going above and beyond to help Avina Westbrook become eligible at UConn, and he didn't necessarily do anything to hurt Avina. He just kind of stuck out of it, or stayed out of it, I should say, and just remained neutral. And maybe Coach Fulmer should have been more proactive in helping Avina become immediately eligible at Connecticut, if not for just to have good karma come back on Tennessee, as the Plavsic case has indicated. But I realize we're kind of saying this in the wake of that storyline, that Tennessee didn't necessarily help Avina become eligible at Connecticut, but Arizona State did not help Uros become eligible at Tennessee. And to me, there is a glaring difference between the two, because on the regular season schedule, does Tennessee play Arizona State this year, Nathaniel?
Nope.
Do the Lady Vols play Connecticut this year?
Yep.
And I realize that the Lady Vols are going to get drilled, probably lose by 15, 20, if not more. But why would you help somebody who was a cancer to the Tennessee Lady Vols basketball program last year and has turned it around to make it seem like Tennessee is the worst place on the earth? Why would you help a very talented basketball player who, again, hurt Tennessee last year? Why would you help her become eligible for a rival and one of the best teams in the country that you play on the road this year? So I would have done the same exact thing that Coach Fulmer did, quite honestly. I would not have helped Avina, but I also would not have done anything to hurt her. And if the NCAA would have called me, I would have been more than happy to speak truthfully. But I'm also not going to go above and beyond and text some folks in the NCAA office and be like, hey, when can we talk about Avina? Let them come to me, and then I will, fulfill my responsibility as an adult in an administrative position such as athletic director, because at the end of the day, it is all about the kids. So long story short, I feel really bad for Plavsic, and hopefully the NCAA ends up reversing their decision, although it does not seem likely. In the short term, and when I say short term, I'm referring to Tennessee's whole entire season. Although Uros does lose a year of eligibility, they will still have him for 3 years going forward. And I was thinking about this before we started recording the podcast, is I guess it will be nice that by the time Uros is eligible to play next year, he will have had a year under his belt with Rick Barnes and his coaching staff, as will Victor Bailey Jr., the transfer from Oregon. And I think that is huge when you consider that you're bringing in Keon Johnson, Jaden Springer, Corey Walker, Josiah Jordan-James is going to be really good. I don't know that he will leave after 1 year. I think he's more of a two-and-done player. I think he'll be here for 2 years. So you're pairing Uros with a year of practice with Rick Barnes under his belt with that core, and you'll have a senior Yves Pons, a senior Jalen Johnson, a senior John Fulkerson, just to name a few. I mean, that roster is going to be stacked next year, and then you add Victor Bailey and Uros to the fold. That's a really scary basketball team for next year. But in the short term, I mean, it absolutely hurts. I think it could honestly be the difference in Tennessee making the tournament and missing the tournament. With Uros, I thought that they would be an NCAA tournament team. I was probably 65 to 70% sure, just because I think that Uros is that talented of a player. Even watching him today in practice, you can tell he's Tennessee's best big man, at least naturally. John Fulkerson is more seasoned, and he just he gets to places on the floor because of experience and gets things done on the court because of experience. Uros gets things done on the court because he is so talented. Somebody that big should not be as athletic as he is. He has great leadership skills, in my opinion. He's very vocal. He's always encouraging his teammates on both ends of the floor. On the bench, he's the first guy standing up. He has nice touch around the rim. He can really pass the basketball. He is long. He's athletic. He can jump. I think he is a very talented basketball player, and if he can put it all together, I think he's going to have a really, really nice career here at Tennessee. So without that, I think it could be the difference in Tennessee making the tournament, because I like John Fulkerson a lot. I don't like John Fulkerson having to be your starting key big man, be your Grant Williams of this year. And I don't mean that by, he has to have the numbers that Grant Williams had. But John Fulkerson as your go-to big man is not a recipe for success, in my opinion. John Fulkerson is at his best when he is the sixth and seventh man, the first or second guy off the bench, in my opinion. And he may prove me wrong. And if the exhibition game was any indication, maybe he will, because he looked phenomenal. He was very active on both ends of the floor. But I think it's a killer for this basketball team, Nathaniel. I know I'm kind of long-winded, but it's just a huge blow to this Tennessee basketball team that I don't think it can be understated. And to sum it all up, Yves Pons, John Fulkerson, Tennessee has to have monster years out of those two. Zach Kent has to be able to provide something off of the bench. Olivier Camois, I think he is going to be really good, even as a freshman. They are going to need him to have a similar year to when Grant Williams was a freshman to offset the loss. But ultimately, I do think it could prove to be the difference in Tennessee making the tournament and Tennessee missing the tournament.
I agree wholeheartedly with you there. I'll kind of get on to that here more in just a second. But I want to touch on a couple of things there you talk about that Barnes was saying. On Monday, he was asked about, how much of an impact does the school that those kids transferring from have on the waiver process. And Barnes said that, he didn't outright come out and say that Arizona State was hindering the process or that they weren't being compliant, but he did. I mean, he insinuated some things about Arizona State. Here are his full quotes when he's asked about how much influence, the first school, as he called it, has on the situation. The first school has a lot to do with it. The first school can help a lot if they want to, if they say how things went and exited. It's real simple out there. If the school, when someone leaves, simply says there is not a spot on the roster at that school, that person is going to be deemed automatically eligible at the next place he goes. So essentially what Barnes is saying there is if the player leaves and the school says there wasn't a spot for him on the roster, then they kind of automatically get that waiver process approved by the NCAA. More quote from Barnes here. Then you get into the part where people say, does that mean you're running guys off? That's not necessarily the same thing. The ones, talk about the waiver processes, the ones that I know have been able to get cleared immediately are where the school they're leaving from fully cooperates to get that person eligible. I think in situations that we've been involved in, I felt like it was important that person gets a chance to go and play right away, because I'm not sure sitting out helps anybody. The thing that immediately came to my mind, Ben, when he talked about that, in the situations we've been in, he felt like it was important to help that person go get a chance to play, was this past off season with DJ Burns. Burns, redshirted at Tennessee at his freshman year, just like Plavsic did at Arizona State. Burns, from what we've ever heard, Ben, from what we talked about in the podcast and from what we've talked about off the record, it wasn't. It was Burns' fault why he wasn't allowed to come back this upcoming season, why he was transferred off the roster. It was stuff he wasn't taking care of business off the court, but that didn't stop Barnes and his staff from apparently going to bat for him, because when Burns got when he transferred, he was given immediate eligibility by the NCAA. He announced back in September 9th of this year, he tweeted out that he was eligible for this season. And he gave thanks to Tennessee. He thanked them for their role in the process. His tweet reads exactly, "I first want to thank the University of Tennessee for helping me in this process and for the hard work and memories that I won't forget." And then he says it was with great excitement that he can announce that he'll be immediately eligible. So he came out and thanked Tennessee for helping him get immediately eligible. Tennessee, I think, did their part in that one to help him get the immediate eligibility. I don't understand why Arizona State, and I'm not putting all the full onus on them. I feel I wouldn't. We don't know what's going on with Arizona State, but Ben, I find it hard to believe that Plavsic didn't get his eligibility and that Arizona State was being 100% compliant and 100% in support of this, because it just I think Barnes makes a good point. We saw with Tennessee football, it seemed like Michigan wasn't they weren't being necessarily the most cooperative with the NCAA, not just with Tennessee, but with kind of a lot of transfers that were coming out of Michigan to other schools. It seemed like there was a narrative there, true or not, that Michigan, Harbaugh, whoever you want to pin it on, they weren't being very supportive of the players transferring out. And it took Tennessee a long time to hear back on Ari Salmon. It was the week before the season started that Tennessee finally heard about Ari Salmon being cleared to play for the season. So I'd say all that to get to this point. To me, I don't think Arizona State's being necessarily, they maybe, like you said, maybe been a little more kind of indifferent, like Tennessee had been with Ivian Westbrook. Even that, though, I think they're being a little more than just indifferent in this. I think they're being, maybe a little standoffish about it. But I agree with you in terms of how this impacts Tennessee's season. I almost think that it makes Rick Barnes adjust his philosophy for the season, where I think with Plavsic in there, they're kind of banking on being able to play him 20-25 minutes most nights, probably a little bit more than that. I would say, just depending on where his conditioning was at. Playing Fulkerson more at the 4, but Fulkerson being able to maybe play 5 in a small ball lineup for a little bit, having Zach Kent be able to spell Plavsic, and having Kamwa play a little bit more of the 4, and really not really having to use Eve Pons at the 4 a whole lot, unless they just were going small ball lineup for a little bit, or unless they really had to because of foul situations. Now, I almost think Tennessee goes. I almost think it might benefit them more because they have a little bit more numbers in the backcourt, and they also their strengths in the backcourt with Turner and Bowden. I think it might benefit them more to go to the same route that we saw Auburn do last year, especially with when Chuma Okeke was out. I mean, they played small ball a lot, and they were still very effective. Obviously, I don't know that Tennessee, as good as shooters as Bowden and Turner are, I don't think they're the same level that Auburn's guards were last year in terms of even the same type of the basketball they played. I don't think Turner and Bowden, their styles fit the same type of offense and style that Bruce Pearl wanted, or that he did last year with the guards he had. But I almost wonder if it benefits Tennessee to just go a little bit more small ball, have Turner, Bowden, and Jordan James, Josiah Jordan James be 3 starters, have Fulkerson be another starter, and then maybe start Pons, maybe start Jalen Johnson, maybe as the season goes on, if he gets more comfortable in the system, maybe have Kamwa be the starter. I think this team is a team that they were already going to be very heavily relying on their guards for most of the season, both offense and defense. But I almost wonder if you can't get away with just being kind of undersized. I know you're going to have a post guy out there to match up with teams you're going to play that have good post presence. And I think Tennessee actually, I'm not sure which team it is. It might be Washington. There's a team that Tennessee plays this year that has almost like a Gonzaga-like front court of like 3 7-footers. So I mean, you're going to have to play in that game You can't just rely on just playing a bunch of guards and one big guy. You're going to have to play a couple of different big guys. You're going to have Fulkerson and Kent both playing significant minutes in that game, and probably Cam House as well, since he's about 6'8", 6'9". But I think this year you're going to see a lot more small ball lineup for the most part. Like I said, there are going to be games where you can't do that as much. But it's going to be a different philosophy than I think what Barnes has done his entire time at Tennessee. Because you look at Tennessee, other than his first year at Knoxville, I mean, he had Kyle Alexander that year, but that was an Alexander that didn't play a whole lot. But from his second season on, he's had good post players to rely on, whether it was an Alexander growing a little bit more, whether it was Grant Williams, who was a good freshman, a great sophomore, and then an elite junior this past year. And Admiral Schofield, who wasn't a post, but he was a very girthy guy who was also very athletic and was a bigger body. You had more of a post presence in his really his first 4 years, but definitely the last 3 years. It's going to be a very different style this year. And Barnes has been around the block long enough to where I'm sure he's dealt with roster lineups like this, whether it was at Texas or Clemson or Providence or wherever else he's been. But Ben, I think it's probably going to benefit Tennessee more this year to have. If Plavsic does not get eligible at any point this season, I think they're going to have to go more of the Auburn route last year of you're going to have some post players, but you're really going to be relying heavily on playing 3, maybe sometimes 4 guards in a game, and just having one big man.
No, most definitely. And as you were alluding to, Rick Barnes mentioned that today, that they're not really afraid to go with a guard-heavy lineup. And it may hurt them when they do play teams that have several 7-footers or even guys that are 6'10", 6'11". John Fulkerson is the tallest guy in the projected lineup at 6'9", and outside of, Uros, who is 7 foot, 7'1", really your only other 2 tall players by basketball standards is Zach Kent at 6'11", but even he's not really somebody you want to let inside the post and let him bang around. And Drew Pember at 6'9", and he's another guy that you don't really want to let get inside and bang around with other big men. They're more guys who are stretch big men who are good on the perimeter, has nice touch around the rim, athletic, can knock down some shots from the outside, contest shots, rebound. Tennessee does not have a true big man without Uros Plavsic. John Fulkerson, I guess technically is the one that they have, but outside of, Uros and Folky, they don't have a true big man. Yves Pons, I was told that he is finally playing his correct position, which is the 4, but even he's 6'6", kind of small, short for a power forward, if we're going by position definition. Olivier Camois, 6'8". I guess he is a true 4, but he's a freshman. And like I said earlier, I do expect big things from him, but at the end of the day, he's still a freshman. So it'll be interesting to see what Tennessee can pull from him. But even when Tennessee does go guard heavy, assuming Lamonte and Bowden are producing, I think that's a lineup that can win you games. Josiah Jordan-James is the real deal. He is so savvy for a freshman, so mature. And with him speaking to the media following the exhibition game, I walked away thinking that he was a 10-year NBA vet. I mean, he is so polished when it comes to talking to the media. Tennessee has 2 really good freshmen on a separate note. Tennessee has 2 freshmen on campus who talk like 10-year NBA vet and a 10-year NFL vet, and that's Josiah Jordan-James and Henry To'oTo'o. It's pretty cool to listen to them talk. But I think Tennessee will be fine when they go guard heavy with Lamonte Turner, with Jordan Bowden, with Josiah Jordan-James, and then you have Folky and Pons down there in the post. You can rotate Camois in. You can rotate Jalen Johnson in. I think that's a winning formula. It may not be a winning formula against Memphis, who has the most talented team in the country. It may not be a winning recipe against Kentucky, who has also arguably the most talented roster in the country, or even against Washington or Cincinnati, some of these tough games that Tennessee has, Wisconsin, Auburn, LSU, a lot of tough games on Tennessee's schedule. So It may not be a winning recipe every night, especially in the big-time games, but it could prove to be a winning formula that gets you to the NCAA tournament, that allows you to finish in the upper half of the league. And, again, that's assuming that Lamonte Turner and Jordan Bowden are producing. Yes, Plavsic is out, but Tennessee's 2019-2020 season will still be determined by the play of Lamonte Turner, by the play of Jordan Bowden. Tennessee will go as those two go. And in addition, really the only thing that changes with Plavsic going out, Turner and Bowden, Tennessee will go as they go. But in addition to that, with Plavsic being out, now they have to have Yves Pons, John Fulkerson, Jalen Johnson, those guys. You can even throw a Zach Kent in there. You have to have those 3 or 4 guys that are juniors, redshirt juniors, that have been in the program for a couple of years now. Those guys have to step up and be more productive than what they have been in the past. And if they do that, Tennessee will win, even if they are going guard heavy.
Yeah, we're going to have our prediction piece about the men's basketball team. At this rate, will probably come out sometime on Tuesday morning. So if you're listening to this podcast on Tuesday, it's probably already out, just depending on when you're listening to it. But be on the lookout for that. We'll have our hard and fast SEC predictions as far as what we actually think Tennessee's SEC record will be. I don't know if they'll have a true overall season record prediction. We may just have kind of a range of what we think Tennessee's records will be, just kind of within 2 to 3 wins of the season. We'll have an NCAA tournament projection if we think Tennessee makes it, and then if they do, what seed we think they'll get, and then the MVP of the season. Of who we think will be kind of the heart of soul. It can be probably one person or 2 players. We'll bid and out, just kind of hash it out and figure it out from here. But we'll have our prediction piece and our season preview piece of the men's team up before they take the court and before they tip off for the 2019 and 2020 season. But Ben, I'm very excited, even though this news about Plavsic is a little bit of a damper. There's still a chance he could get in. I don't know if the odds are very good that Tennessee's second appeal, the secondary appeals process will go through, and that like you said, how many times we hear about these processes on the first time getting accepted, let alone the second time. So I'm not super optimistic about it, but we'll see. But even still, I'm still excited for this team and excited to see what they can do. And more and more this roster for next season gets added on to it, I get more and more excited for Tennessee's season next year, because that team really it could be special. It could be one of the best teams Tennessee's ever had. If not, maybe I don't want to put too many expectations on them, but they're tracking to have obviously the best recruiting class in school history, so they should be tracking towards having one of, if not the best team in school history. But that's next year. We haven't got to this season yet, so I'm excited for this season. Regardless, it's going to be some good matchups on the court. Even if Tennessee doesn't win a whole lot of them, you're playing teams like Washington. I think there's a chance you'll definitely play Florida State. There's a chance you'll play Purdue again, or VCU in the Emerald Coast Classic. You're going to be playing Memphis in a highly touted, just a marquee event in Knoxville. That game's going to be a lot of fun. You're playing Cincinnati as well. So you have some really good non-conference matchups, and then obviously you play Kentucky twice in the SEC. You're going to play Florida. You're going to play LSU. You're going to play Auburn. It's going to be, I think you play Auburn twice this year. Yeah, you do. Once again, you end the regular season playing Auburn, and the final game of the SEC and final game of the regular season. So you've got a lot of games that I think will be fun and ones to look forward to. And a lot of games in Thompson Bowling have already sold out for this season as well. But then I think that'll be kind of where we wrap up this podcast. We could talk quite a bit more about basketball. We could talk quite a bit more about football. Next podcast this week will be more football exclusive. We may do something after the game on Tuesday for the men's team to kind of talk about some takeaways from that first game. If not, we may do that. We'll keep you posted on that. But Ben will be at the game. We'll definitely have our takeaways piece and just different stuff from that game as well. But it's basketball time in Tennessee and football time in Tennessee. We're at the crossover event now where everything's kind of blending together. Football and basketball both going on at the same time. It's a good time to be a Vol fan right now because you have two teams that I think a lot of fans are very excited about. But we'll talk more about Tennessee, Kentucky, and football later this week on the second podcast, and probably touch on basketball a little bit more as the week goes on as well. But thank you all for tuning in to another episode here. Signing off for Ben McKee, I am Nathaniel Rutherford. This has been another episode of the RTI Podcast.